following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. Hello, listeners around the world on radio, streaming, and podcast services. This is It's Not Therapy. I'm Liana and I am not a therapist, but I am your source for navigating the madness of mental health using my top 10 sayings for going good crazy. This week, I'm going to introduce you to Tim McDonald. Tim is a stage 4 colon cancer survivor and liver transplant recipient. He's a research advocate, a Florida chapter leader for Man Up to Cancer, host of the Advocacy at Work podcast, and the author of From Patient to Advocate, Turning Survivorship into Impact. Now, this is going to be one of those shows where the interview takes up the bulk of the show because Tim is going to take us through what it was like for him to find out that he might be dying and his journey from diagnosis to treatment to even more treatment, and ultimately becoming an advocate for people in the same situation as him. And this is heavy stuff. It is, but I think it's important to talk about, especially when it comes to colorectal cancer. Colorectal cancer is, to the words used in the article, skyrocketing in patients under 55. There are people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s getting diagnosed with colorectal cancer, and early treatment, early detection and treatment are essential for good outcomes. This is one that you can survive. You're very likely to survive it if you catch it early. But the American Cancer Society reported that 20% of diagnoses in 2019 were in patients under age 55. That was double the rate it was in 1995. Now, since then, rates of advanced disease increased by about 3% annually in people younger than 50. Now, there's a lot of speculation about why this may be. It says, well, overall, cancer mortality decreased by 44% in people younger than 50 in the United States between 1990 and 2023. Colorectal cancer increased by 1.1% each year since 2005, going from the 5th leading cause of cancer death in this age group to the 1st. And if Tim's story inspires you to get checked early, then we've done a good job. If Tim's story helps people have a little bit extra in the tank to get the treatment they need to survive the condition they're struggling with, to just get out of bed every morning while they're doing something hard, then, we've done our job this episode. So we're going to get into it after the break. I know I'm keeping this real short because I want to save more time for Tim. Questions, comments, any feedback from this show, email me at liana@nottherapyshow.com or have your say on social media at nottherapyshow. So like I said, we're going to go to the break, come back with Tim McDonald, stage 4 colorectal cancer survivor and liver transplant recipient. When we come back, what it's like to be told you may be dying on It's Not Therapy. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back on It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist. It is time for the interview. I teed this up in my first segment. I'm stoked and nervous to talk about this with Tim McDonald. Tim is a stage 4 colon cancer survivor and liver transplant recipient. Big list of credentials going on. He's a research advocate with Fight Colorectal Cancer, Florida chapter leader for Man Up to Cancer, and a member of patient advisory councils for HAPA and the PAN Foundation. He is also the host of the Advocacy at Work podcast and the author of from patient to advocate, turning survivorship into impact, which is the reason Tim is on the show. His publicist sent over the book. I read it, and that's why I'm a little bit nervous. Like, Tim, you did not pull punches on this book. So thanks for coming to It's Not Therapy. Where do you want to start with people knowing about you?
Well, I guess maybe let's start when I got my diagnosis because I think that's the first thing that most people like really wonder about is like, what is it like to hear the words you have cancer? And I will preface this by saying that I had kind of done a lot of mindfulness work, meditation, just being very self-aware about a decade before I was diagnosed. So I took it a lot differently. Even my doctor who told me thought something was wrong with me because I was so calm and level-headed about it. And I don't want that to negate the fact that it was very serious what I was hearing, but I was also smiling, laughing, and joking with him too. Because I remember one of the lines was when he kept asking me over and over if I needed my wife to come get me, somebody to walk me home, anything like that. I just point blank looked at him and said, "Let me ask you a question." He said, "What?" And I said, if I act any differently, is it going to change what you just told me? And he said, no. So that's kind of how I view things. It's like no matter how we react, it doesn't change what just happened. We need to deal with it and move forward in the best way that we can. And so I heard those words. But to be honest, the first thing that I was really concerned with was walking home and telling my wife this news because I knew she was not like me and she was going to take it a lot worse. But and I was very accurate in that assumption. But we did end up doing that. And I just fully believe that everything happens to us for a reason in life. Sometimes we just don't realize it. Sometimes we might never find out why, but sometimes we find out like right away, and other times it takes months or years or whatever.
Mhm.
And it took me about 3 days to realize that this happened to me because I was meant to share my story so that other people wouldn't be having to go through what I was about to go through. And that just meant like educating people on the importance of getting screened at the right age for colorectal cancer,
Mhm.
understanding the warning signs, understanding the fact that if you have a family history of this, you don't wait until the age that you should get screened. You should
Yeah.
get screened a lot sooner. All these things. And that's kind of, I didn't call it advocacy at the time, but that's kind of how I started.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and, I got on this really aggressive chemo. Well, I went through a couple oncologists until I got into my major cancer center here in Tampa, Florida.
Mhm.
But that was we could go down a whole nother path with that conversation. But
Yeah, it's navigating the system is, I've had other guests on about that. It's very difficult in and of itself.
yeah, but my first oncologist gave me the best advice ever, which was get a second, third, 10th opinion every step along the way. Don't go until you hear what you want to hear, but go until you believe in what you hear. And
Oh, okay.
I still live with that and I still give that to other people as advice because I think it's so important for people to understand. But when we got into the cancer center, I remember my wife was with me and the oncologist, we were telling him I've already had like 2 or 3 infusions at the time from these other oncologists.
Okay. Okay.
But he looked at us and said, you were on 2 different chemos. They're both the standard chemo treatments. We can actually combine those together. It has a much higher effectiveness rate, but it also comes with much more intense side effects.
Mm.
And I just looked at my wife and I like, smiled and nodded my head yes. And she nodded her head yes. And I said, okay, let's do it. And that got me started. But I really felt good about what was happening because after I got diagnosed, I had a colonoscopy just because my colon was almost completely blocked
Oh
and
my
my liver
goodness.
was
Okay.
covered. And
Okay.
so they put a stent in, which is just this narrow screen-like mesh in a tube that they insert in your colon where your tumor is, so it keeps it open enough for your stool to pass through. I was after my very first infusion. I was going to the bathroom, and I don't want to get too gross here, but let's just say I was in there for 45 minutes. My wife came to check on me after about 25 minutes. I said, "Everything's fine. I just can't get this one out, you know." And I finally was giving up and saying, "Okay, I'm just going to get I hate even like thinking about it, but just
Hmm.
grab a big wad of toilet paper and yank whatever is hanging out there out." And I did it and it came out. It wasn't that painful. It wasn't pleasant, but it wasn't that, that bad. And I just was like, wait a minute, what
Yeah.
is this? And I realized it was the
The
stent after I
stent.
cleaned it a
Yeah.
little bit. And I called my the oncologist that I had, the very first one at the time. I said, is this okay? And he said, it's very encouraging. Your tumor probably shrunk enough to let it pass. And I said, so I went through this whole thing thinking, oh, this is going to be a piece of cake, right? I'm just going to get this all done. My body's reacting good to the chemo. I'm going to be good to go. And then the longer I got into it and the more I started like finding out, it was just like, this is not going to go away this easy. It's probably going to kill me. The odds of me living even 5 years was
Yeah.
13%.
Yeah. At
And
stage four. Yeah.
yeah, and but I always said that I don't believe in statistics. I just
Hmm.
believe that, you know, we own our own story, and that's not to say that we can do whatever we want just because we think it, but
Hmm.
that we have to believe that we can beat this in order to have a chance to beat it. And that really like focused in on the fact that, like I was going to find a way to make this happen. And so I joined these groups. Man Up to Cancer was the first one. I know you mentioned I lead the Florida chapter. I joined
Hmm.
Man Up to Cancer. A friend of mine, right after I announced I was diagnosed, connected me with them. They provide so much of emotional support, I would say, for men dealing with cancer, whether you're a caregiver or a patient or survivor. But really, more than that, what they did was they opened my eyes up to the fact that there was other people out there who were stage 4 who had lived for 5 years with this disease. One of the first local guys that I met here, he's since passed, but he was 11 years into his survivorship when I met him. He was only going every 3 weeks for 15-minute chemo just to kind of keep it, it was kind of
Hmm.
stable at the time. It was good. And he had been through lung surgeries, liver surgeries, colon
Yeah.
surgeries, all this stuff. And so I'm just like, oh, great. Here's a guy that I can relate to. This is my inspiration. And so that 13% number became the only statistic I cared about. I wanted to be part of that 13%. And that's what I focused on. But then we don't really talk about treatment options really in Man Up to Cancer. So I asked one of the guys who was running it, I said, hey, I know you're a colon cancer guy. Where do you go for treatment information? And he pointed me to this other group called Colon Town. I got in there. They were like overwhelming at the time. It was on Facebook groups and they had like 100 different, what they call neighborhoods, which were just different groups based upon like what stage you were at, where your
Right.
metastasis was located, all this other stuff. And I just really got in there. And then I learned about for people that had liver mets that there was all these different treatment options. And this was still very early in my diagnosis, like 3 months in. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. I'm not a candidate for this. I'm not a candidate for this. I'm not a candidate for this. But the last one I read was about a liver transplant for colorectal cancer patients.
Okay.
And I said, maybe I am for that. And then I started, going down that path, but you're not eligible to become a recipient of a liver donor until you've been in treatment for a year because they want to make sure that you respond well over a period of
Right.
time.
Okay.
And so I did that. And I got to tell you, as soon as I qualified, I got my colon resected. I had biopsy on a some lymph node that showed some minor enlargement. I did everything that they wanted. I had another PET scan. I did everything that they wanted to qualify me to be able to start searching for a living donor. And as soon as I started that process, I'm like, I'm connected with so many people. I'm going to be one of the quickest ones I had, right? And I am also kind of a control freak. I like knowing what's happening. I like keeping my finger on the pulse of everything. I like being the squeaky wheel and letting people know if they're not getting things done when they said they were gonna, that they should be following up and all that good stuff. So I was like getting my spreadsheet, putting people's names in that I knew called for me to be a donor, when they called, what stage of the evaluation they were at, all this other stuff. And with our HIPAA laws here in the US, which are the privacy laws for your
Hmm.
health information, it is like you call up to the transplant team and they tell you nothing
Yeah.
other than, hey, people are calling, just keep doing what you're doing, That's like
Yeah.
all they say. And so mentally, I was like, wait a minute, how am I supposed to control this if I can't get all the information I need?
Hmm.
And that was like the first kind of thing that I started experiencing. But then it happened over and over again. And you start getting your hopes up that, hey, this person might be the one, right? This might be the one who does it. Yeah, they don't meet the height requirement that they told me that the donor needed to be, but they're talking to him seriously. They're telling me that they're very encouraged by what they're saying. I'm like, I'm getting my hopes up. And boom, somebody bursts the bubble and they're not following through with them, or they change their mind, or whatever it is. And
Hmm.
I just got so depressed and devastated during those periods that it literally took me days, if not weeks, to kind of recover and rebound to be positive again, like I normally am, about moving forward with this and doing it. But I got to tell you, the more often you do it, and I remember when before my mom passed, she had Alzheimer's and congestive heart failure. But what the cardiologist told us is the congestive heart failure was like a roller coaster. Your highs start out high and your lows aren't too low, and then but each time the high doesn't
Yeah.
get as high
Yeah.
and the lows go deeper until you just can't come back up again. And I kind of equate that to how my emotions were feeling during this looking for a donor process. That's exactly how I was feeling. So every time I'd go down, learning a disappointment, I'd come back up, but then I wouldn't get as high, and I'd just go back down lower the next time that happened. And finally, in January, the in 23, so I had been looking for almost 12 months at the time, about 10 months. I still had nobody. I thought I had somebody in December. That fell through. This lady lived in Rochester, New York, which is where I was getting my transplant. She
Okay.
read it from an email from a woman who I know who owns a business who's never done an email to any for any cause before, but
Oh.
she did it for me to help find a liver to her 14,000 people, and this was one of them. We got on a call together. We talked for like an hour and a half. We really got along. We resonated. Since she lived there, she could go through the evaluation all at their place, and that meant everything could get done at one time, which means she
Right.
went in for 2 days and through all the screening. And I was on vacation with my wife, and I was down in Turks. I remember this, and my wife's like, are you going to follow up with that person? Because she was supposed to have her, went through her evaluation last week. They had the transplant board meeting on such and such a date. You should hear from her by now. She was always so responsive. And I'm like, you know what? We're on vacation. I'm just going to wait until we get back home. And
Hmm.
we get back home, and I still didn't want to, because at this time, I kind of learned my lesson. I'm not
Yeah.
trying to control anything. I'm trying to
Yeah.
just let things happen. But then after about a week, I emailed her and I said, hey, I'm not like trying to bug you or anything. I just wanted to like understand. I knew you went in. Did you ever hear anything? And she was just like, I'm so glad you emailed me. I didn't know how to let you know this, but I just had a change of heart.
Oh.
And I literally was devastated for about 24 hours. But that's how different it was from the beginning of this process to the end of
Yeah.
this
Oh,
process.
the longer you
I,
go with something like this, the more you get worn down. Yeah.
yeah, you get worn down, and I'm just like, I'm not letting this down. But I remember talking to my transplant team because I had actually gone to a surgeon here in Tampa, a liver surgeon, who
Hmm.
said he doesn't do transplants, but he does liver resections.
Okay.
And nobody had told me before that I was resectable in my liver. But
Oh.
he told me I could be resectable in my liver. And I got all excited that this might be another option for me. But for the first time in my treatment for 3 years almost, I had an option and I
Hmm.
didn't know what to do. Like that was basically, you mind if I swear?
Go ahead.
That was basically a mind for me, you know?
Yeah,
It was
yeah,
really one of those things that just literally said, wait a minute, what should you do now? You
right,
know, like I've
right,
always believed that the transplant was going to be my path forward. And here I was presented with a resection. And so now I go back to my transplant surgeon, who I've been working with for over a year, and I tell him that, hey, here's the conversation I had. I'm not ready to do this yet, but I'll give it another 2 months. And if we don't have any progress, I think I'm going to go this route because I can't do chemo anymore. I'm
right.
just like 2.5 years of it. I'm sick of it. I'm ready to be over it. But I also knew that a resection also came with a higher chance of recurrence than transplants did. And
Oh,
my,
because there might still be some cancer in the liver because
yeah,
they're just
like
cutting
resection,
away
they
the,
only
okay.
take part of your
Yeah,
liver
yeah.
out because they don't know if there's microscopic cancer cells still in your liver. So there's a much higher chance of recurrence, which I
Okay.
knew. But my transplant surgeon had shown me a report that was coming out the following week when he showed me, showing 14 cases that they had done and the scans right before the transplant, and what the scans would look like when they took the liver out.
Hmm.
And in 12 of the 14 cases, there was more tumors on the liver than what they showed right before they took the liver out,
Okay.
meaning that there was actually more cancer that the CT scans weren't
You
showing.
weren't showing, yeah.
And and so he just said, Tim, just give us a little bit more time. I really feel like we're close to something. Just hang in there.
Okay.
And so I did. And that got me to my liver transplant. I got the call. I remember it was a buddy of mine up in that I met from Man Up to Cancer in Rochester, who was also a stage 4 colorectal cancer person, going to the same place I was getting my transplant. When I first met him, he said that his oncologist just told him about a transplant and that he was going to go down that path or pursue that
Okay.
path. And so, unlike me, where I was doing everything I could to make people aware that I needed a liver transplant, he posted once that he needed a transplant.
Okay.
And my donor knew a friend of his who shared it and called because she wanted to be an organ donor and called for him, not because she knew him, just because it was the person there. It was in
Wow.
Rochester and she could be a donor. And so when I announced that I had a donor, when I got the call, this buddy of mine up in Rochester texted me and said, "Hey, congrats on your on having a donor. Do you know when your surgery date is?" And I told him, and he came back a minute later and he goes, "I think I know who your donor might be. Are you interested in knowing?" And again, just like our HIPAA restrictions, donor restrictions are the same way. It's like, wait a minute, do not share any personal information. Do not get anything out. It's up to the
Right.
donor if they want to tell you, blah, blah, blah. But I only said it only if she wanted to know who I was. And he said, yeah, I just checked with her. Here's her information. But long story short, we got on a Zoom call when I got back from vacation. And oh my gosh, we talked for like 2 hours on the Zoom. It was like we'd known each other all our lives. He had
Wow.
a very similar personality, just very, you know, kind of bubbly, funny, joking and, having fun. And I mean, we were just like a match made in heaven. And it was like when I went up for my evaluation, she actually I needed to get one box that I didn't have checked was to get another colonoscopy before my transplant. And this is like I'm
Okay.
going up like 4 days before my transplant, right? Or a
Sure,
week
sure,
before
sure.
my transplant. And they're like, so you got to go through all your evaluation things again, just to make sure you're still in good condition. And you also need to get a colonoscopy. And I had tried to get one here and I could not get one. They were all like months and months out. I tried all my doctors that I'd seen. Hey, do you know somebody? Blah, blah, blah. And
Oh, that's
finally I got in with
hard.
one and they couldn't get me one in time because it was the day actually I was flying up to Rochester to get my evaluation. So Rochester, I explained it to Rochester and they were just like, we'll just do it when you're up here. Just stay 2 extra days. And
Okay.
so, and I wasn't working at the time and I didn't have a lot of money. So I talked to my donor and I told her what was going on. And because we had never met in person at the time, only on Zoom. And so we were planning on getting together for a meal or something. And I told her this story, and she goes, "Well, don't book another hotel. Just come stay at our house. You're going to need a ride
Wow.
anyway. I'll just drive you to your colonoscopy." And so she actually, I'm like, how is this for meeting somebody for the first time, right? I don't know if you've ever gone through colonoscopy prep, but you probably heard of stories.
It's not
Yeah.
pleasant. Yeah.
No, you got to
Yeah.
keep running to the bathroom, all that. You can't eat
That
anything. You get
stuff
a
is
little
so
hangry,
gross.
It's
Yeah.
like, so I'm like, what a perfect way to meet my donor in person while I'm prepping for a colonoscopy, right? I'm going to
That
abuse her bathroom. I'm going to be hangry and not be in a good mood to be around. And needless to say, they were so kind, her and her husband. They took me out to dinner. I didn't eat, but I got to meet them. She bought a whole freezer full of Italian ices that I could have. And
okay.
I think there's still some in her freezer because I couldn't eat all of them that she bought. But but anyway, I mean, that's how close we got and the type of person that she is. And my favorite part of this is when she, walked me into my colonoscopy because she knew right where we were going. She worked at the hospital actually, so she knew
Okay.
right where we were going. And they always ask you, because you can't take an Uber and you can't take a taxi or public
Yes, that's
transportation. You
right.
need somebody that you know to drive you.
That's right.
And so they said, "And who drove you today?" And I said, "My donor." And they're like, "You're what?" And I'm like, "No, I'm getting a liver transplant on Tuesday." I'm like, "This is my donor." And they're like, "I don't think I've ever heard
Yeah.
anybody call their driver their donor before."
It's a heck of a story. I mean, when you say roller coaster, I think you painted it out well. Let's pause and go to break, and I want to come back and talk about that sort of best of times, worst of times reality that you just laid out, and the mentality of continuing to stick it out and continuing to try. Because I think a lot of people listening right now are going, I couldn't do that. I couldn't hang on. I would have given up. Sound good?
Sounds great.
All right, Tim McDonald, everybody. Tim's an advocate, a stage 4 colon cancer survivor, colorectal cancer survivor. I got
Yeah,
so.
colon I was, but we in the world we call it colorectal just because that encompasses rectal
There we
and
go.
colon. So
Okay, so stage 4 colon cancer survivor, liver transplant recipient, the author of From Patient to Advocate, Turning Survivorship into Impact. We'll be back after this on It's Not Therapy. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back and It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist. We are still talking to Tim McDonald. If you missed the last segment, go online, pull up the podcast version if you're listening on the radio. Tim just told us the story of, getting diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer, going through the roller coaster of treatments and different kinds of chemo and liver transplants and everything it takes. And I stopped before the break and said to Tim, who is the author of From Patient to Advocate, Turning Survivorship into Impact, I said a lot of people, Tim, would go, I can't do this. You hit that point where it wasn't happening. And especially, you work with Man Up to Cancer, which is a wonderful organization specifically because men don't want to be burdens, right?
no.
You said that the hardest part wasn't getting the diagnosis, it was going home and telling your wife. And I think a
Yeah.
lot of guys are like, uh-huh, that would be it to me too. There is a unique psychological thing with men and being providers and being strong and being independent that any of these major health crises just demolish, right? You can't anymore. If you try to be an island onto yourself, you can't. You needed somebody you'd never met before to be a liver donor, for instance. Now you said that was hard for you.
It was
So
very
yeah,
difficult.
yeah. So unpack that. What had to shift? Because you said you went from being a control freak to saying, I'm not in control.
Yeah, I
What?
think that was honestly the first step for me really was understanding that those lows that I talked about before, right? When I found out I was disappointed because somebody decided that they changed their mind or that they didn't work out for whatever reason, those lows, I was not productive during those
Hmm.
times. I wasn't motivated and I was not productive. And if I needed a liver and I wanted to keep living, I needed to understand that that type of response was not the best thing for me.
Okay.
And all I know is that if we, and I think Einstein's always quoted as saying this, right? If we keep doing the same thing over and over again and expect different results,
Yeah, yeah. No,
um,
that's the definition of insanity. Yeah.
that's insanity, right? And so I knew that I needed to change how I was reacting. And the first thing that I thought of was, well, I could try and control my reaction, or I could just come to terms with the fact that maybe I shouldn't try and control this situation. Maybe
That's
I should just
hard. Yeah.
maybe I should just trust the process and let it unfold the way it's gonna unfold anyway. And I and it was not easy to do. I mean, it's much easier to say than do. But I think what that did was it really opened me up to understanding that, you know what? I don't need to be in control of everything that happens. I can just, when this is meant to happen, it's going to happen. I didn't decide that I was going to get cancer and when. I just accepted it that I did and moved forward. And that's what I need to do with searching for a donor. And so that's kind of how I that was the shift for me at that point in time, was just understanding that I didn't have control over the situation. I just needed to trust the process.
I mean, that takes a lot. That's a heck of an abstraction, right? Just trust the process. How do you do that? Because I think again, a lot of people are like, I couldn't. I don't trust people. I don't trust that, I don't trust in the kindness of strangers. Was that where the advocacy comes in? Like if you're out there and you're helping other people, you have more hope that other people will help?
I think that, the thing that really powered me through searching for my donor and even through the surgery of getting the transplant itself was definitely the fact that I knew I was helping other people. There were so many patients that I was talking to who
Yeah.
were pursuing a donor, a living donor process, that I was able to give practical, helpful advice to. And I remember sitting in the hospital recovering from my transplant, and the nurse would be in there, and I'd be on the phone talking with one of these patients. And for them to sit there and listen to me, and I get off the phone and I'm like, do you see the smile in my face? Did you hear the energy in my voice when I talk to this person?
Hmm.
And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, you're telling me I can't work. I don't know what you just called what I just did, but this is
Man.
the most important work that I do, right? This is what fuels me. This is what fills me and lifts my soul up. This is what heals me. And I think that, and I've looked at this just not that long ago too. It's like, having a sense of purpose is one of the best medicines that
Absolutely.
you can have. And I think by helping other people, by advocating, and I think that's how I define advocacy, right? Like we can self-advocate for ourselves, but when you start doing it for others in addition to yourself, that's true advocacy, right? And that's belonging and that's purpose that you have. Now you're not just doing it selfishly, you're doing it for the greater good. And that to me was one of the biggest things. I didn't realize it at the moment, but I think that is what really helped me continue through each day. And I think that, another thing that one of our guys, he was one of the original six that we have in Man Up to Cancer, one of the six, kind of original guys who did most of the
Hmm.
work. He was always quoted as saying, make it your best day possible. And what that meant was it didn't matter what was happening today, how shitty it was, how good it was, how, if you were, going under the surgery, getting chemo, whatever you were doing, just having the side effects, the
Yeah.
worst side effects that you've ever had. All you can do each and every day is just make that day the best day possible. And I think that kind of lens on what I was doing, coupled with the fact that I had a purpose, helped
Hmm.
me really start understanding it's not about comparing myself to what I used to be or what I was, or
Yeah.
even how I felt yesterday, or what I envisioned for the future. It was how can I just make today the best day possible?
And that's something I think is really poorly understood about going through something like this, is that it's not just enough to survive. You do need a purpose, or else, the brain worms do set in. And not everybody is like, I want to work. Other people have other things that are going to give things purpose and meaning. But I think you nailed it, that giving the individual person going through it the ability to say, this is what I need. Please help me get it,
Mhm.
right? When you encounter the system, and you talk about this in From Patient to Advocate, turning survivorship into impact, the experts will give you statistics, they'll give you kind of big picture stuff. And you have to go in there. You're a very happy guy. You seem to be able to say things with a smile, but the the human element of being on the receiving end of this system and these procedures, the professionals, the people with the degrees and the training and the surgery and the MD, they can't provide that. Only somebody who's gone through it can provide it. And, From Patient to Advocate is a really good guide for people who want to get into this.
Yes.
So, how are ways that people can find purpose? Not necessarily because they've survived a disease. There's a lot of people out there going, "Oh, I'm 30, I'm not a millionaire yet, my life is over." How do you find purpose? How do you go about identifying this is what I need to feel meaning today?
Yeah, well, I think, earlier on when I first started, sharing my story with you, the one thing that I realized was I work online in marketing and community management, right? And for me, sharing stories online was what I just do and have done for years. And so knowing that I wanted to create awareness, even though I wasn't calling it advocacy, was my first step of putting meaning behind what this disease brought me. Um, you know, and I always encourage people, and I just recorded a podcast that's coming out this week, actually, with a lady in San Diego who's got a son who's got a rare condition. And, what she really, and I think this is so important, is just identify the gap that you have, that you see, and that you're passionate about, and figure out how you can change that one little thing. That's where you start, right? Because A, it's personal to you, and B, you're not trying to change the world, you're just trying to change this one little thing.
Say that all the
And I
time.
think
Yeah.
that's where it starts, right? Now, my advocacy has evolved over my years. I'm, 5.5 years into my survivorship. I've been no evidence of disease for 3 years. I have gone from awareness advocacy to legislative advocacy to research advocacy. And if you would have asked me if I was going to be a research advocate when I was first diagnosed, I would have told you were on crack, because I am not like a scientist. I am not
I
a research person.
I
I am
ab
like not
I
that.
absolutely give you credit for that, because the credentialism in anything is so strong. Like, if you don't have all the letters after your name, people don't just say you don't know what you're talking about. They claim you're a fraud or some kind of grifter. So,
Well, I think the important thing in advocacy, though, research advocacy in particular,
mhm.
is, and I had to talk to another guy who is a researcher professionally and is a research advocate. They do not want us at the table
No, they
to
don't.
be a researcher.
Mhm.
They want us to be there with our personal experience and our learned experience from others that we talk to.
Yeah, you say that in the book, that it's
Yep.
a combination. It's really it's hard though. I mean, I know you talk about it in the book, and I fully, recommend people read it, that there is like overcoming the different ways of speaking was something you had to find. And that stuff, I'd love to touch on that as our final little chunk here. I feel like we've just started, but that is something that I think everybody can take away from this. Not, if you don't want to be an advocate, that's fine. You don't have to be. If you haven't got cancer, well, someday you might. But that I say on this show, listen twice before you talk once. And there's a shortage of that. So, how do you recommend, with your marketing background and going to this field of, I don't know anything but my own experience, and here are people that want to hear that, but they may not understand what they're hearing. Does that make sense? How did you bridge that gap?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think it was on my first research panel that I was on, and it was with the government. So it was very, uh, all these forms and processes that you needed to go through. If you've ever been involved in government work, you know what I'm talking about. And it was that in itself was overwhelming to me. But the one thing when I started reading all this, it was just, I felt like I was in over my head. I thought I should just email them, tell them I can't do this. And I was so nervous. I did the best I could. I said, no, Tim, you made a commitment. You need to get through this. You don't need to do it again, but finish what you started.
Sure.
And that's what I tried to do. And when we got on you do all your written evaluations, and then you have 2 days of meetings and calls with the researchers, and you go through not each proposal, but most of the proposals that you evaluated. And the other patient advocate on the call went first.
Okay.
And after I heard her speak, it wasn't anything more about all these fancy terms and all the how this interacted with this. It was just about how she viewed it as a patient. And I'm like, oh my gosh, did I just work myself up over all this nonsense to just come here and say, I feel really good about this one because I think it's going to help patients in X way. That's all I need to say. And we were told if somebody's already said something, we don't need to rehash it 10 times. Just say you can say you agree with it or bring up a different point. So I was just like, well, here's why I'm excited about it, and shared it. And it was so interesting to see, because the first researcher didn't. Us two patients said it was great. The second researcher got on and started explaining why he thought it was great. It ended up turning into be one of the ones that we gave the highest scores to because of the fact that we shared our opinions and one of the researchers shared it, and the other researcher changed his opinion because of not only the other researcher, but because of the two patient reviewers that were on there. And to me, that was eye-opening to the point of, man, I was thinking that I had to justify my seat at the table. The reality was I earned that seat at a table. I didn't have to prove myself being there. I earned my way through all these years of treatment that I went through, and all the research advocates and all these support groups that I was involved with. That earned me a seat at that table. And I think there's a fundamental difference when we start looking at things that we earned versus I need to justify myself being here.
And that goes against everything the world builds up out there, right? So,
Yes.
Tim, I really wish I could talk to you more, but I mean, we're out of time. Tim McDonald, please check out his book, From Patient to Advocate, Turning Survivorship into Impact. Check out the organizations he's part of. Fight Colorectal Cancer, Man Up to Cancer, the PAN Foundation, and check out the Advocacy at Work podcast. Tim, is there anything else you want to tell people that we did? I'm sure there's a ton, but where do you want to leave people with?
Well, I think the biggest thing is I think, no matter how bad things are, just remind yourself, and this is what I do to get through each day, is are you going to be thinking about this in 5 minutes? Are you going to be thinking about it tomorrow? Are you going to be thinking about it next week? And if you're not, don't waste time thinking about it now.
Tim, wise words. Thanks so much. Congratulations on the 5.5 years, being the 13%.
Thank you so
much. If thoughts help, You have the best ones from me. Thank you for coming on It's Not Therapy. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back in It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist. We have 3 minutes left after I'm blown away by my interview with Tim McDonald, stage 4 colorectal cancer survivor, liver transplant recipient, host of the podcast. I have lost my notes here. Host of the podcast, Advocacy at Work. Advocacy at Work is Tim's podcast, and author of From Patient to Advocate, Turning Survivorship into Impact. And some of you might be going, wow, that was like super inspiring. I'm super fired up. Other people might be going, I don't have his strength. I can't do that. I'm feeling bad about myself. For the next 2 minutes, I'm going to speak to you out there who, are socially comparing yourselves to Tim, and maybe I can't work while going through chemotherapy. I can't, this isn't my purpose. It doesn't make me feel good. That is okay. Everybody has different things that give them a sense of purpose. Yours is not going to be the same as Tim's. It doesn't have to. If it's, listening to people when they're down, that's a great purpose. If it's sitting in nature, doing art, gardening, even sitting and listening to music, if you think your purpose while you are undergoing serious medical treatment is just to get through each day, then that's your purpose. All these are very, very good answers. There are no wrong answers as long as you have that sense of purpose, a reason to get out of bed most days. And finding that purpose is very hard when you're struggling with medical things. Your body not working the way you want it to, your body rebelling. It's the most helpless feeling in the world. And that's why having tasks, having things to do, things to stay busy, to feel productive, to feel useful, that's why it works. But again, everybody finds those things in different ways. Tim's is just one way. That's the entire purpose of the show. If something a guest says one week doesn't work for you, something the guest says the next week might. Or stuff I say might. There's no one path in this. There never has been. That is what makes mental health so challenging and wonderful, is there are as many ways to get it right as there are people. And if you don't get it right on a given day, tomorrow's a new day. We all have good days. We all have bad days because we're human. That's our time for this episode. Questions, comments, concerns, any feedback, Liana@nottherapyshow.com is my direct email, @nottherapyshow on social media. You're crazy is only a problem if it's hurting you. See you next time.